There comes a time in life when you have to admit that even movies you love and care about deeply can occasionally make mistakes. Plenty of great films have big problems at their core that we choose to ignore in order to get maximum enjoyment out of our viewing experience. Obviously, there are more movies with more plot holes than we could ever cover in just one list, so here we'll sample just 10 of cinema's most irritating plot holes. Strap in and get ready to be annoyed for the rest of the day. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are the 10 most annoying movie plot holes. 10. Limitless. MORRA'S memory. There are a number of things that make Limitless a less than perfect film. The most egregious in film oversight comes from Bradley Cooper's Eddie Morra and his nonsensically unreliable memory. No, we're not talking about the time skip, but instead the fact that he apparently completely forgets to pay back a huge loan, thus causing himself a world of problems. This is a highly intelligent man who, in his drugged up state, is able to remember bits of information he glanced at 20 years earlier, but somehow he isn't able to remember a simple loan due date. It's not that he couldn't afford it either. He quickly turns around millions of dollars worth of profit on his initial loan, and he could have simply cashed out what he owed as soon as he got it and delivered it in a lovely gift-wrapped box to the loan shark. Unfortunately, this isn't what happened, and instead a whole load of unnecessary drama unfolds because apparently the world's smartest man can't keep track of a diary. Ugh, it's just disappointing. 9. Ant-Man. Physics faux pas. Everyone loves Ant-Man. He's a charming, likeable character with a sympathetic backstory and the added benefit of having Paul Rudd's charming face. You know what everyone does not love, however? The chronically inconsistent science behind the Pym particle, and thus the entire basis of the Ant-Man movie. The shrinking works basically by reducing the amount of space between the particles and the atoms in an object or being, thus making them a lot smaller and a lot denser. The first problem here is that according to this law, nothing should ever be able to shrink smaller than an atom, because only the space between the atoms is shrinking. But in a way, this can be excused by the explanation that even Pym was still learning about the capabilities of his particle. The inexcusable problem is that it is clearly stated that when something is shrunk, its mass is retained. Only this is only evident when it's convenient. When Scott drops to the floor and cracks a tile, that makes sense, because he's 200 pounds of grown-ass man slamming into an ant-sized section of ceramic. Later, however, he's able to run along the barrel of a gun without so much as slightly shifting its direction. The absolute killer on this front is the classic tank on a keyring bit, where we're led to believe that Hank Pym keeps a whole Cold War-era tank attached to his keys. That's what, 40 tons of metal sat in his pocket and he's just waltzing around? Come off it. 8. 28 weeks later. It should have all been prevented. 28 weeks later does, at times, do a great job of highlighting the problems with an army-controlled state and accountability in disaster scenarios. They set it all up to show us how controlling the soldiers are, how everything is monitored and all these calculated steps are being taken to get the UK back to normal after the events of the first movie. Why, then, were they suddenly so careless that Don was able to get into the room in which his wife was being quarantined without anyone knowing or stopping him? Why was he able to be in there long enough to kiss her, become infected, and then go crazy and smash her head in, all without anyone hearing or noticing? It seems like a glaring abyss of idiocy in what's meant to be a tightly controlled, army-run facility. Quarantine rooms would be guarded. Asymptomatic carriers who could threaten the well-being of an entire country, and, as we see at the end, world, would be watched. But no, apparently not. The world's going to end, and it's all because apparently nobody thought to guard one infectious woman. 7. Liar Liar. Annulment Antics. The scene in Liar Liar, which sees Jim Carrey's Fletcher Reed somehow manage to stumble through a day in court and not ruin everything for his client, sure is a good one. Reed's client, Samantha Cole, is going through some painful divorce litigation, with her husband accusing her of adultery, meaning that under the prenuptial agreement she signed, she isn't entitled to any of his assets. In a stroke of what can only be considered pure genius, Reed uses the truth to his advantage for once. He reveals that Cole lied about her age in order to get married, and at the time of the marriage and signing the prenup, she was a minor, making her unable to sign any legal agreement without parental consent. The prenup, it seems, is null and void, and Samantha can rake in the big bucks. The big hole here, however, is that since she wasn't able to legally get married at 17, this should make the whole marriage invalid, annulled, and leave her entitled to nothing. So after all the theatrics and drama of it, really the court should have still ruled against Cole. We'll chalk it up to Hollywood magic that things all work out. 6. The Rise of Skywalker. Somehow, Palpatine returned. so this film is packed full of plot holes, and it's one of the many reasons that people despised it and everything it stands for. Really, a whole video could be made just about a few of the plot holes that plague this movie, but for the sake of everyone's sanity, we're gonna keep it short and focus just on Palpatine. First of all, how did he survive his death in Return of the Jedi? In the Rise of Skywalker visual dictionary, they explain he was kept alive by some cultists, but in the movie itself, they do literally nothing to explain it, and really it just shouldn't be a thing. Next, his hidden fleet of destroyers were apparently just sitting under some ice for decades on Exegol, as if that isn't a weird and tactically nonsensical thing to do. Furthermore, how did he manage to gather all the kyber crystals to make the lasers for this fleet, when most of them were consumed by the previous 2 Death Stars? There are millions more problems, they're just really not worth the time going into them. 5. Gravity. Clooney's sacrifice makes no sense. Gravity is not a film you should watch if you're really into space and physics, because some of its most pivotal moments take some real creative liberties with the science of it all. The film's most famous defining point comes as George Clooney's Lieutenant Matt Kowalski makes the ultimate sacrifice and allows himself to be pulled off into space in order to save his colleague, Stone. Well, if you're to actually look at the realities of how space works, this instantly falls apart. First of all, Clooney appears to be zooming away at a pretty rapid speed for what should be a gentle float at most. The reality is that he would not suddenly pick up pace and drift away any faster. He and Stone are both stationary and would have the exact same momentum. All she really needed to do was give the rope a good tug, at which point Clooney would have started drifting towards her and eventually just gotten close enough to grab hold of the rope. The sacrifice was unnecessary, and this dramatic ending was just another insult to the hard-working folks at NASA who would never be so stupid. 4. The Hangover. There's CCTV everywhere. The Hangover is not the kind of movie that needs to be picked apart. It's ridiculous and it knows it is. One thing that just doesn't make sense and doesn't get a free pass for being purposefully silly is that in all the time they were out looking around, their missing friend was just on a hotel roof. If nothing else, Las Vegas is heavily monitored. With all that money flying around, casinos obviously need to do their best to protect their assets. On every door, room, corner and alleyway, there is either a guard or a camera. It seems highly unlikely that a man would be able to climb onto the roof of a hotel and remain there for several days completely undetected. Not only do staff likely go on the roof every day to smoke or carry out tasks, for him to get there in the first place he must have gone through several restricted areas and certainly set off some alarm bells. Not to get too dark or anything, but he also would not be in a good state after days on a roof, with no shade, food or water, in Las Vegas highs reaching about 40 degrees Celsius. Honestly, it's a bit of a miracle he survived. 3. Armageddon. NASA really isn't that stupid. Ben Affleck's commentary on this 1998 sci-fi flick says it all. He claims that he raised the point that it would be much easier to train astronauts to drill than it would be to train oil drillers to be astronauts, a point which Michael Bay did not take to very kindly. Basically, the plot of this film is that a giant asteroid is due to impact Earth in 18 days and wipe out all humanity. So NASA wants to send some drillers to put a big old hole in it and insert a nuclear weapon and blow the stray projectile to pieces. Simple enough, right? This high-stakes situation would call for immediate, calculated action. So why the hell would you think to use drillers with no astronaut experience? The drilling crew go through 12 days of training, which instantly takes over 60% of the very narrow survival window out of the equation for drilling. Surely you would take a trained crew, spend a couple of days teaching them how to drill, and then send them out to complete the mission. Not only would it leave you more time in space to allow for mistakes and unexpected calamities, but it would also overall reduce the risk of said calamities in the first place. 2. The Karate Kid. He wins by breaking the rules. It almost feels like a sin to pick apart such a well-loved film, but there's one glaring plot hole that cannot be ignored and really does detract from the overall experience once you notice it. Just like the first rule of Fight Club is to never talk about Fight Club, the first rule of the big final fight is no head kicking. Great, it's a clean, clear, simple rule that should be easy to follow. So why did we all just sit by and let it happen when the Karate Kid himself, Daniel, wins his fight by straight booting his opponent in the head? There was one rule, and he won by breaking it. Did the referee just not notice? Did he forget his own rules? Or did he actually just think it was such a badass move he decided to let it slide? Either way, the point remains that the film should have ended very differently. He blatantly broke the rules and should have been disqualified. And maybe with his clear inability to follow guidelines, he should take up a sport with less rules and respect. Maybe ultimate frisbee. 1. Shrek 2. Donkey and dragon have babies. Oh, you think we're kidding with this one? We're not. We're going to avoid getting too crude, but it should suffice to say that the biology of this union is questionable at best. Just how do they expect us to believe that a donkey and a dragon managed to successfully create babies? Just looking at the two of them next to each other, you can see that Donkey would need to be about 300% larger if he were to match Dragon's height, and that's when she's sitting down and slouching. Yes, height differences do exist in human couples, but a proportional equivalent would be a 6-foot woman dating a man who reaches no higher than her kneecap. You learn in basic high school biology that only animals of the same species can reproduce and create fertile offspring, and for the most part that animals of different species can't reproduce at all. Donkey and dragon aren't just different species, they're a different class, family, and genus too. By all known laws of biology, this shouldn't work. Yes, we know it's fictional and it exists in a world where magic is possible, but what are the chances that someone is able to cast a spell to make dragons and donkeys compatible mates? What a job that would be. And on that ridiculous note, we've reached the end of this list of the 10 most annoying movie plot holes. If you can think of any more plot holes that really get your goat, then let us know in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.